in the world. It's now number 2 behind glyphosate. It's used in more than 80 countries, so we're talking about a global issue when we're concerned about this compound. But it's now outlawed in Europe, where the lawyers like for me to say it has been denied regulatory approval. Whatever the difference is, I'm covered. The point is, though, that the company is based in Europe. So we're using 80 million pounds of a chemical that's outlawed on the continent that the company calls home. So we set out to do these studies, and they said, well, we like your patent and all, but we'd like for you to also work on the African claw frog, because that's kind of the African claw frog xenophus is kind of like the lab rat of the amphibian world. Everybody uses xenophus. Who knows why that is? Rat using 30 times what we know to be biologically active. And that doesn't mean that if you go home tonight and test your water, it's going to be 3 parts per billion. That means on average over a year, it might be 300 tonight, but on average over a year, it's supposed to be 3 parts per billion for the water to be safe, which is 30 times higher than what we know to be biologically active. So, we went into the field, and here's an animal that's now collected from the field. You can see the testis there. And I'm going to slice it up for you. So imagine I'm slicing up a salami, hold out a slice for you. The color's different because of the stain we use for the microscopic analysis. So I blow that up, and now blow that section up. What you're looking at are testes that look fine, except that instead of sperm, those big circles you see there, those are eggs developing in this animal's testes. No sperm, just eggs. In fact, we did a study across the United States, and what we were able to show in red is every place we find hermaphrodites, we find atrazine contamination. And this is work that we published in Nature. We've now extended that study. We have thousands of samples, and we're analyzing that to submit for publication. Fish, frogs, hogs, dogs, cats, humans, you name it. What's more is, my graduate student is showing that if you take human breast cancer cells and expose them to atrazine, they start making aromatase. Here's why that's significant. Breast cancer is estrogen dependent. Does that make any sense? You get breast cancer after menopause, typically, when your blood levels of estrogen are lower than they've ever been in your life. Turns out, though, that when you get breast cancer, they express aromatase, they make their own estrogen, and that's what causes those damaged cells to turn into tumors and grow. This is so important that the number 1 treatment for breast cancer right now are chemicals like letrozole, which decreases aromatase, decreases estrogen, and stops those damaged cells from turning into tumors. How much sense does that make when we're using 80 million pounds a year of the most potent contaminant of water that does exactly the opposite? And we know it promotes and induces breast cancer in rats. And it made sense to somebody because see, Novartis Oncology offers treatments. That's right. The same company that sold us 80 million pounds of atrazine that turns on aromatase now sells the number 1 treatment for breast cancer, which blocks aromatase. So if you're living in the Midwest taking letrozole to block your aromatase, how is that impacted by the atrazine in your drinking water that's turning on aromatase? In fact, I wrote a paper that ended up in the President's panel on the environment of cancer. So it presumably went straight to Obama's office. Syngenta immediately wrote to my dean. They do that a lot. They said, quote, while Syngenta does share some corporate history with Novartis and AstraZeneca, it has been completely independent of both since November 2000. Syngenta simply does not manufacture or sell pharmaceutical products. Well, it turns out that in January 2000, they wrote this now, not me. They wrote, quote, the observed induction of aromatase, the rate-limiting enzyme in the conversion of androgens to estrogens, may be an underlying explanation for some of the reported hormonal disrupting and tumor-promoting properties of these herbicides in vitro. In that same year, in July 2000, the FDA reports that a marketing application for letrozole was applied for by Novartis. So I'm not saying there's any kind of conspiracy. I'm just saying what an interesting chronological coincidence that in January 2000, they discovered that atrazine induces aromatase and promotes breast cancer. By July of 2000, they start selling aromatase blocker to treat breast cancer, and by November 2000, they stop selling atrazine and spin off another company to sell it. I'm just saying it's an interesting coincidence, that's all. That's moved me in some very different ways. We know from rats, I've already told you, that atrazine induces prostate and mammary cancer. Other studies have shown that atrazine causes immune failure in rats, just like they've shown in frogs. Other studies have shown that when rats are exposed during pregnancy, the babies suffer neural damage. An EPA laboratory showed that atrazine causes abortion in rats. Another EPA laboratory showed that when the mothers are exposed, the sons are born with prostate disease. Another study showed that impaired memory development occurs in the daughters of when mothers are exposed, also by EPA, and that's what that looks like. And then a recently published study showed that when those rats grow up and reproduce, their offspring have retarded growth and development. The company argues now that rats should not be used as a model for humans and the EPA should not consider these data. But they use the same rat models when they want to put something on the market. But it's not good enough to get them on. The important point here, to me, that's moved me, is that this bottom rat you're looking at, it never saw atrazine. That bottom rat suffers from atrazine that its grandmother was exposed to. That rat has retarded growth and development because his mother was exposed in utero. When we look at atrazine and its half-life in the environment, Europe stopped using it 15 years ago or so, and the levels in the groundwater and aquifers have not changed. It will probably be around for at least 40 years. That means that this conversation is not about me and you. We've already been exposed. This conversation is not about our children. Our children will be exposed. Our grandchildren will likely be exposed. And according to these rat studies, our grandchildren's grandchildren will likely be affected by pesticides that we're applying today. And when I think about my little girl, who's just turned 15, that moves me in a very different way than I've been moved as a professional before. Especially when I read lines like this, words from our sponsor, Syngenta assumes no obligation to update forward-looking statements to reflect actual results. Some lawyer wrote that. And the EPA, even, with regards to atrazine, says the ultimate decision is much bigger than science. It weighs in public opinion. That moves me, even though my advisor once told me, don't be an advocate. He said, let the science speak for itself. But the other side isn't letting the science speak for itself. So I have crossed the line, you might say. I maintain a website you can go to get information about atrazine. I don't always update it the way that I should. Keith Ellison, the U.S. Congress, has written a bill to ban atrazine. You can write to him directly from my website and supported that bill. A group of high school and college students have started a page on Facebook that you can follow. And there are various petitions that you can sign on that have tens of thousands of signatures. As a result of this action, you might imagine I've been called some nasty things by the industry. In one report, they called me an environmentalist, which I looked up because I figured it was an insult. And it said, any person who advocates and works to protect the air, water, animals, plants, and other natural sources from pollution and its effects. I wondered who, what person would not be an environmentalist? But what's more is, they've called me something even nastier. Hayes, it says, biology turned activist. So I was sure that was the insult. I looked that up, and activist, it says, one that advocates and practices activism. But, well, that's not really informative. So I looked at activism. It's a doctrine or practice that emphasizes vigorous action. So it still wasn't clear, so I looked up vigorous. That's possessing vigor, full of physical or mental strength or active force. I thought this started to sound pretty good. So I looked up active force. And active is characterized by action rather than by contemplation or speculation. I thought that sounded pretty good. And force is a strength or energy, especially of an exceptional degree. Active power. And I felt bad. Because I thought they were trying to insult me, and there they were. Giving me a compliment.